Welcome to Silent Time Traveler. If you like my work only if you feel it brings you some calm, please consider subscribing. But more than that, I'd like to know something simple, something human. Where in the world are you listening from right now? And what time is it for you, there in your own corner of the night? Midnight? Dawn? Somewhere in between? Take a moment to notice, because that too is part of this journey, time, and how we pass through it. And now, together, let us drift. Drift not just across geography, but across the centuries, across the forgotten millennia, into a world that existed before memory, before writing, before civilization itself. The world of our prehistoric ancestors. Imagine stepping outside, but not into your street or town, not into the hum of traffic or the warmth of street lamps. Step instead into an earth untouched by pavement, an earth without cities, an earth of wind and stone. The silence is heavier, yet not empty. Because in the tall grasses, something stirs. In the shadows of trees, eyes glimmer. You are not alone. The smell is different. Clean, yes, but laced with wild musk. The musk of herds of predators, of damp earth where rain has seeped. The world presses close against your senses, sharper, rawer, less forgiving. And you realize, as our ancestors realized each morning, life is not secure. Each breath could be the beginning of survival, or of ending. Hunger was the first and most relentless companion. Not hunger as we know it, that nagging emptiness easily solved by opening a fridge, but a hunger that gnawed constantly, shaping every decision. What could be eaten? What must be avoided? Our ancestors watched the animals. They noticed which berries birds swallowed, which leaves deer chewed, which roots pigs unearthed. Yet even so, mistakes were made, some plants poisoned slowly, some violently. To eat was to risk, but not to eat was to weaken. Think of chewing a bitter root, the fibers stringy, the taste sharp, your stomach clenching. But pressing on, because the ache of hunger left no choice. Survival was stitched together by such choices, day after uncertain day. And then fire. Imagine the first time fire was held, cupped almost reverently. It was alive, crackling, snapping, giving warmth, light, protection. But it was fragile. It could die with one gust of wind, one careless hand. Some groups waited for lightning to strike dry grass. Others learned to coax sparks from stone or to rub wood until smoke whispered out. But no matter the method, once a flame existed, it had to be guarded. Someone always kept watch. Children were taught from birth, never, ever let the fire die. The fire gave warmth against cold nights, cooked meat so bellies grew stronger, and kept predators, at least most of them, at bay. But more than that, fire gave people a center. They gathered around it. They spoke, they hummed, they shared. Fire was not just heat, it was belonging. Homes, if we can call them that, were built not for beauty, but for necessity. A cave offered protection. But sometimes caves were already claimed by bears. A structure of branches covered with hides kept out rain, but leaked smoke and trapped mud. Inside, it was dark, crowded, uncomfortable. But comfort was a luxury they did not seek. Warmth and safety were all that mattered. And always, movement. When food shifted, the people shifted. When rivers dried, the people walked. Their true home was not stone or wood, but the rhythm of the earth itself. Look at the bones archaeologists find. Arthritic joints, broken limbs that healed crooked, teeth ground down from chewing tough roots, and grit-filled grains. Our ancestors' lives were carved into their skeletons. And yet there was resilience. Humans, unlike faster predators, could sweat, cooling themselves. They could walk and walk, chasing prey for hours, sometimes days, until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. It was not strength alone, but patience, stubbornness, endurance that made survival possible. But above all, survival was collective. Alone, a human was fragile. Together, a group became something more. One watched the horizon while another carved tools. One remembered which valley had tubers in spring, another remembered which cave had water in summer. The old, far from useless, became walking libraries. Their scars were lessons, their stories warnings. And so, survival was not simply individual strength. It was memory passed forward, work shared, dangers divided. Life was sustained by the invisible net of community. And so, in this first quiet wandering through the prehistoric world, we see how the essentials of existence, food, fire, shelter, the body, and the bonds between people, allowed humanity to endure another day. The flames flicker low, the hunters return weary, the children curl into their mother's warmth, and for now, survival has been achieved. But survival is not enough. To carry life forward into tomorrow required something deeper. The beginnings of culture, of tools that outlasted the hands that shaped them, of words that could carry memory beyond one single breath. Because survival achieved for tonight was not the end. The question always returned, how would it be achieved for tomorrow? What would make life more than a daily scramble? What would make survival something that could stretch across generations? The answer begins with tools. Imagine a hand gripping a stone, not just for throwing, but for shaping, chipping at it, again and again, with patient rhythm, until the stone's edge is sharp enough to cut. That cut means meat can be sliced more cleanly, hides can be scraped to make coverings, bones can be cracked to reach the nourishing marrow inside. A simple flake of stone becomes more than a rock. It becomes memory, made solid, a thing that outlasts the hand that holds it. Over time, tools grew cleverer. Spears tipped with flint, scrapers smoothed from bone, fishing hooks carved from antler. And every tool carried a lesson. When one person discovered how to shape a better edge, the knowledge spread, repeated and repeated, until the group itself became wiser. Tools were not just objects, they were continuity. But tools alone were not enough. What truly sustained life was the sharing of knowledge. And that required something even greater. The beginnings of language. We cannot know exactly when words first became words, but we can imagine the slow unfolding. At first, gestures, pointing, mimicking. Then sounds, grunts, cries, each with a pattern. Over time, a call for danger became a word for lion. A gesture for food became a word for berry. Language meant that experience no longer died with the person who had it. The location of a hidden spring, the timing of migrating herds, the warning of poisonous fruit. These could now travel from mouth to ear, from parent to child, from old to young. And with words came stories, and with stories came memory. Think of the first stories told around a fire. Not written, not recorded, only spoken. Tales of a great hunt, of spirits in the wind, of ancestors who once braved storms. These stories bound groups together, gave them identity, gave them reasons for endurance. And in that way, language was not just survival but belonging. With language and memory came something else, ritual. To modernize, rituals may look like superstition, a chant before a hunt, a dance in the night, a careful burying of the dead. But for prehistoric people, ritual was not decoration. It was survival in another form. To bury the dead carefully was to honor memory, yes, but it was also a way to keep disease away, to maintain group cohesion. To sing before the hunt was to steady the nerves, to focus the group, to remind them that the task was shared. And slowly, ritual became culture. People began to paint on cave walls, smearing ochre and charcoal into images of animals, of hunts, of handprints pressed like signatures across time. These paintings were not mere art. They were communication, perhaps prayers, perhaps lessons for children. They were, in their quiet way, strategies for sustaining life. Another great challenge was time itself. Not the time we know with calendars and clocks, but the great turning of seasons. Cold came, food vanished, and people learned. The world moves in cycles. They began to watch the skies. The moon waxed and waned, the sun shifted, certain stars returned each year. With patience, people learned to connect these patterns to the Earth's patterns. When the sun stood low, the cold deepened. When certain plants bloomed, certain animals followed. This knowledge was survival stretched across months, not just days. It allowed planning. It allowed storing food, making clothing and preparation, moving before snow closed paths. Survival was no longer only reactive, it became proactive. And then another layer, humans learning to cooperate beyond their small band. Encounters with strangers were dangerous. They could bring violence, but they could also bring exchange. A new tool, a different food source, a mate from another group. Slowly, painfully, networks grew, trading shells, stones, pigments across hundreds of miles. Stories and rituals blending, spreading. This web of fragile contact meant that knowledge traveled farther than feet could walk. A technique for sharpening flint could spread across valleys, a ritual for honoring the hunt could echo in caves far from where it was first sung. This was survival expanded, sustained by connection as much as by fire or food. But let us not soften the truth too much. Life remained cruel. Childbirth claimed many mothers, infection claimed many wounds, predators struck without warning. Even hunger itself never fully vanished. Archaeological remains show entire groups who starved, their bones thin, their teeth showing the marks of desperate chewing on bark or leather. There was no guarantee, only chance and effort, and the thin thread of community holding against despair. And yet, remarkably, that thread held. Generation by generation, people adapted. They did not merely survive a day, they sustained life across thousands of years. The very fact that we are here, listening, imagining, dreaming, is proof of their success. When we compare their life to ours, there is a quiet irony. They endured hunger, cold, fear, discomfort, things we dread, and yet they lived in a world that was vivid, immediate, full of meaning. Every sunrise mattered, every fire was sacred, every meal was earned. We, in our comfortable rooms, may not know that feeling. We may not know what it is like to walk 3 days for water, to watch the stars because they are your only clock, to sing not for amusement, but to steady courage. We may not know it. And yet it lingers within us, in our bodies, in our instincts, in our very bones. Because those prehistoric struggles shaped what we are. And so the story flows onward. From the first fires to the first tools, from words whispered in the dark to rituals carved in stone, from fragile groups to networks of exchange. This is how life was not only survived, but sustained. And still, one question remained. Not only how to live from day to day, but how to pass life forward in a deeper way. How to leave behind more than bones, more than tools, more than fleeting fires. How to leave behind meaning. And that is where we must continue. Because sustaining life was never only about bodies or tools. It was also about leaving behind something that reached farther than the next sunrise, something that could outlast flesh and bone, something like meaning. When we look at the handprints on cave walls or the red ochre sprinkled in burials tens of thousands of years old, we realize these people were reaching for more than food. They were reaching for the invisible. A handprint pressed against stone was not just decoration. It was a message. I was here, I lived, remember me. A body covered in ochre before burial was not just practical. It was ritual. It suggested belief that death was not the end, that life needed to be carried beyond. In these moments, survival stretched into imagination. People were no longer only sustaining bodies. They were sustaining stories, sustaining hope, sustaining the invisible threads that make life feel more than just endurance. Archaeologists find figurines carved from bone, small shapes of women, wide-hipped, heavy-bodied. Perhaps fertility symbols, perhaps prayers for abundance. We cannot know for certain, but we can guess that they represented continuity. Because survival was not just about today's food, it was about tomorrow's child. To sustain life meant to pass it forward, to hope for children, grandchildren, a tribe that continued after your own fire went out. The first gods, the first spirits, may have been born out of this hope. The wind that howled was more than air. It was a presence. The animal that died was more than meat. It was a gift. The night sky was more than stars. It was a pattern, a promise. Belief then became a tool of survival as powerful as stone blades. It gave courage in the face of fear, comfort in the face of loss, unity in the face of danger. And with belief came art. Imagine torchlight flickering on cave walls, revealing painted bison charging across stone, deer leaping, hunters with spears. Why paint them? Perhaps to teach the young, perhaps to honor the spirits of the hunt, perhaps simply to remember. Art was survival in another form, memory fixed in color and line. A way of saying, this is what we saw, this is who we are. It also gave people a chance to share emotion, to laugh, to grieve, to hope. In a world where everything was dangerous, art allowed people to step beyond danger and into meaning. Survival was also shaped by a curious partnership, the bond with animals. At some point, wolves drew close to human fires, sniffing scraps, offering watchful eyes. Over generations, some became companions, guardians, hunters at human sides. This partnership would become dogs, the first domesticated animals. A survival pact. Humans gave food and protection, dogs gave warning, loyalty, and help in the hunt. It is hard to measure how deeply this bond changed human life, but surely it softened loneliness, added safety, and perhaps even added warmth to sleeping bodies on cold nights. To sustain life meant not always standing alone, but reaching outward, even across species. When we step back, we see that sustaining life was not one single invention. It was a web of countless small things, a stone edge, a song, a shared meal, a ritual burial, a painted wall, a faithful dog, each by itself fragile, but together forming continuity. Generations passed, each one leaving behind a little more than it had received. Tools grew sharper, fires easier to make, shelters stronger. Stories became myths, myths became traditions, traditions became the first cultures. And slowly, humanity grew into something more than survival. It grew into civilization. Now, as we sit here in the quiet of our own rooms, with walls, roofs, heaters, lamps, it is easy to forget how thin the line once was. Our nights are safe, our food is steady, our lives in many ways are easier than any of our ancestors could have imagined. And yet, perhaps, we have lost something too. For they knew every day that survival was precious. They knew hunger, but they also knew the taste of food earned after struggle. They knew cold, but they also knew the sacred warmth of fire. They knew fear, but they also knew the deep comfort of community pressed close around them. Sometimes, in our comfort, we forget the meaning. They could not forget. Every sunrise for them was proof that life had been sustained. And so, as you listen now, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is for you, you carry their story in your very breath. Your bones, your instincts, your heartbeat, all shaped by their endurance. Think of it. The fact that you are here, alive, breathing, listening, means that an unbroken chain of survival stretches behind you. Every ancestor found a way to keep going, to sustain life long enough to pass it forward, through storms, through hunger, through fire and ice. It is almost unbelievable. And yet it is true. So tonight, as you drift toward rest, let your mind settle like embers in the fire. Let the hum of prehistoric struggle become a kind of lullaby, a reminder that life is fragile, yes, but also enduring. That we are the result of countless generations who faced impossible odds and survived. Their survival is your existence. Their endurance is your inheritance. Their story is your story. And in that quiet truth, perhaps, you can find peace.